The flight had already begun boarding when the gate agent stepped in front of her, voice sharp, eyes cold. Economy boards to the right. Phones rose instantly. Whispers spread. A black woman stood frozen in first-class boarding, holding a ticket she had paid for dignity pressed flat under fluorescent lights. What no one at Gate A14 knew was that the woman being blocked controlled the future of this airline. A single message on her phone could erase billions ground executives and collapse careers. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply paused and let power move in silence. The air at Gate A14 carried the familiar rhythm of travel wheels rattling over polished stone gate calls echoing through high ceilings. The aroma of roasted beans mingling with disinfectant and jet fuel. Travelers shifted in long lines, economy snaking toward the right business in the middle and the short carpeted path reserved for first class. The sign above it was simple priority boarding. Doctor. Amina Wallace approached with her boarding pass in hand. At 42, she had the presence of someone accustomed to rooms where billions were decided with a nod. She wore a charcoal suit cut to perfection, a silk blouse in ivory, and simple diamond studs that caught the light without needing to announce themselves. She travelled light, just a leather carry-on and a phone that contained more leverage than anyone in that concourse could imagine. Behind her, a handful of associates lingered in business class waiting their turn. They knew the drill. Let their CEO board first. Never interfere. Trust her poise. She preferred it that way. At the podium stood Karen Holt. 37 neat uniform, pressed sharp hair, scraped into a severe knot. Lips drawn into a line that suggested rules were more important than people. She had been scanning tickets all morning with the quiet authority of someone who believed this square of carpet was her kingdom. The passenger in front, a white man in a navy suit, extended his ticket. Karen barely looked, let the scanner beep, and smiled as she waved him through. Then she saw Amina. The smile evaporated. Economy is boarding to the right, Karen said. Her voice clipped in, certain heads turned. The crowd felt the shift immediately, like the drop in cabin pressure before turbulence. Amina held out her boarding pass. First class 2A. Her tone was even unshaken. Karen didn't take the ticket. She folded her arms. Priority lane is for first class and elite members only. Please step aside. The man who had just passed glanced back confused. He had gone through without question. You haven't scanned it, Amina said quietly. Please do. Karen shook her head. We've had problems with people trying to slip in. Economy is that way. The phone started rising, almost choreographed. A teenager tilted his camera, pretending to scroll. A mother with a toddler shifted her child and frowned. Someone whispered, "She's clearly first class." Another muttered, "Just scan it." Amina extended her pass again. Steady. 2A is mine. Karen plucked the slip as though it might soil her hand, scanned it, and the machine chirped green. But instead of moving aside, she tapped her keyboard and handed the ticket back with 2 fingers. System's glitchy. That seat's been reassigned to a priority client. You'll be accommodated later. The word accommodated landed heavy. I purchased it weeks ago, Amina said. You'll get a voucher? Karen replied smoothly, turning her body to block the lane. Please step over. The hush deepened. Passengers stared. The hum of the terminal quieted into a sharper sound disbelief. 2 uniformed security officers appeared, summoned by Karen's signal. What's the problem here? One, Taryn asked. Seek confusion, Karen said briskly. We'll reseat her in economy. The officer looked at Amina. There is no confusion, she said, her voice carrying without effort. 2A belongs to me, Karen cut in. She's holding up the line. Phones clicked a whisper. That's discrimination. Another watch. This go viral. Amina lowered her hand. Let the ticket rest on the podium. Her eyes locked on Karen's. Policy is a word. Dignity is a standard. Someone gasped softly. The line bristled. Karen's jaw set. Board or step aside. Amina didn't neither. She placed her carry-on beside her, drew out her phone, and opened a secure channel known only to 3 people. Her thumb hovered for a moment. Then she typed 2 words. Freeze contract. The message shot outward like a silent detonation. Downtown, in a skyscraper office, a Treasury team stared as a wire transfer froze midstream. On screens where numbers usually flowed in confident Marina the Red Hole appeared. A $2 billion deal months in the making. Days from closing had just been pulled back into her hand. Amina slipped the phone into her blazer. To the crowd. It looked like she had sent an ordinary text. To those who would feel it within minutes. It was an earthquake. Her young associate, standing a few feet away, shifted as if ready to step in. Amina raised her hand slightly, palm pressing downward. Stand down. She would handle this herself. Karen welcomed the next passenger with a smile that looked too bright. The scanner beeped. The jet bridge swallowed another traveler. Amina stood still. Silence wrapped around her like armor. She had long ago learned that silence, when chosen, was louder than shouting. The mother with the toddler stepped forward. "I'm sorry that happened," she said quietly. "Thank you," Amina replied, her voice calm. The toddler waved. Amina's lips softened into a faint smile. Phones captured it instantly. The dignity, the patience, the quiet refusal to bend. Karen shifted uneasily. She sensed the crowd turning, though she didn't yet understand the scale. She snapped board or move aside. The supervisor's radio crackled, his face drained of color. He looked at Karen, then at Amina. "Operations wants a word now." Karen stiffened. "I'm managing a live boarding. Step aside," the supervisor ordered. Karen hesitated, her certainty faltering. The supervisor turned to Amina. "Dr. Wallace." The use of her name rippled through the line. Recognition status authority. Amina inclined her head once. On behalf of the station, he said carefully, "I apologize for what happened at this gate." Karen's eyes widened. She glanced at Amina, confusion and fear flickering. Amina picked up her boarding pass and her bag. She didn't walk toward the jet bridge. Instead, she said, "Accountability boards before I do." And in that instant, though most didn't yet know why, the airline had already lost something far greater than a seat. Because minutes later in offices far from Gate A14, executives would learn what Karen Holt could never have guessed. With one message, the woman she dismissed as not first class had made a $2 billion deal vanish. The silence around Gate A14 didn't last. Within moments, it began to fracture into whispers, into the rustle of jackets as phones were raised higher, into the metallic chirp of notification sounds echoing off tiled walls. Passengers had filmed everything. The refusal, the calm insistence, the pointed line about dignity, and they had captured the most important detail of all, the unflinching stillness of a black woman who refused to be moved. By the time Amina stepped away from the boarding carpet, one clip had already left the concourse. A teenager leaning against his backpack hit upload on TikTok. The caption was only 4 words. She said, "Dignity first." The video was 40 seconds long. In less than 5 minutes, it would pass 100,000 views. Karen Holt still thought she had won a small battle. She turned back to the line, jaw-tight eyes flashing with the adrenaline of authority challenged. But behind her, the supervisor's radio crackled again. He stiffened. His gaze flicked nervously at Amina, then at Karen. Something larger than a boarding dispute was moving through channels he couldn't see. Amina checked her phone once, not for messages from the airline, but for confirmation of what she already knew. A single notification blinked from her COO contract hold in effect. Tubate paused, awaiting your lead. The weight of the words was invisible to the passengers around her, but their echoes were already rippling outward. In a tower across town, a Treasury officer had just called his superior in panic. On a conference line, an investor whispered, "Why did the Wallace Fund pull the authorization? Somewhere a futures trader began to sell." And back in the airport terminal, a college student with an oversized laptop bag was typing furiously on Twitter. "Just watched a black woman in first class get told to move to economy. She didn't raise her voice. She just said, 'Digna standard. If you don't believe racism exists, come to Gate A14. In 15 minutes, that tweet would cross 200,000 impressions. At Black Stories Unveiled, we have seen again and again how a small moment of arrogance at a gate becomes a storm no corporation can contain. Passengers began choosing sides right there in the line. A mother said aloud, "That was wrong," a businessman muttered. "She should just sit down and board." A young woman whispered to her partner, "I've been treated like that before." Cameras kept rolling. The debate had already begun, and the internet would amplify every word. Karen's smirk returned for a moment as she processed another passenger. To her, the black woman had simply delayed boarding. The system had bent in her favor, as it always did. She couldn't feel the ground shifting under her feet. But Amina could. She stood by the window carry-on at her side, gazing at the tail fin outside. She wasn't watching the plane. She was watching the reflections of passengers whispering behind her, the screens lighting up the comments flowing. She knew exactly how quickly those sparks turned into wildfires. Her phone buzzed again, this time, not from her COO, but from a trusted friend in finance. 2 words lit up the screen. Market sliding. She slipped the phone away. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't argued, hadn't even insisted on boarding. She had simply reminded the airline of something far larger than their gay policies. Who held the real power? The viral wave hit TikTok first. The teenager's clip crossed 500,000 views within half an hour. Comments flooded in. "She's all of us who've ever been told we don't belong. This is why I record everything. Who is she?" On Facebook, a blurry live stream posted by another passenger began to spread. It captured the exact moment Amina said, "Policy is a word. Dignity is a standard." Within an hour, it had been shared 5,000 times. On Twitter, the hashtag #NotFirstClass began trending. The airline didn't yet know it, but the story was already escaping their control. Karen finally noticed the cameras. She hissed at a passenger to put the phone away, but it was too late. Clips were circulating. The internet was cutting and looping, her sharp words contrasting them with Amina's calm. A man in line leaned forward and asked his neighbour, "What do you think she's going to do now?" The neighbour shook his head. "She already did it. You can tell that was the mystery." What looked like silence was actually a detonation. Amina remained still, giving nothing to the cameras except composure. She let the crowd speculate because speculation fuels virality better than explanation. In the control rooms of the airline, phones began ringing. A corporate travel liaison reported that a major account had frozen funds. Executives demanded answers, but none of them yet connected the freeze to the calm woman still standing at gate A14. The stakes were no longer a boarding dispute. They were financial, reputational, and personal. For Amina, it wasn't just about being misjudged at a gate. It was about the patterned boardrooms that questioned her investors, who doubted her. The countless times she had been told not first class in more ways than one. This moment was all of them distilled into a single spark, and sparks, when filmed and shared, become fire. Passengers began approaching her quietly, offering support. One young woman said, "I've been invisible at counters my whole life. Thank you for saying something." Amina nodded, offering nothing more. Her dignity was the message. The first reporter tweet landed half an hour later. Hearing reports of discrimination at JFK. Black woman with first-class ticket told to move. Passengers say video exists. The story had left the airport. At Black Stories Unveiled, we remind you a single act of dismissal can trigger consequences measured not in minutes, but in millions. By the time boarding closed, Karen realized something was wrong. Her supervisor had pulled her aside, voice sharp eyes darting toward Amina. Operations is asking questions. "Do you understand who she is?" Karen laughed nervously. Just another passenger trying to jump the line. But the color drained from the supervisor's face. "You don't get it. That's Dr. Amina Wallace." Karen frowned, uncomprehending. "She's the investor behind the $2 billion aerospace contract, and you just told her she wasn't first class." The words hit like cold water. Karen's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes flicked to Amina, who still stood by the window, serene, untouchable. Cameras still lingered, phones still buzzed, and outside the airport, the storm was already gathering. Because in the next 60 seconds, clips would cross 1 million views. And the ripple effect was about to cost far more than a seat. The buzz inside Gate A14 was no longer just about boarding. It had become theatre. Phones framed the moment like spotlights. Every gesture frozen into potential evidence. Every silence amplified. Karen Holt still tried to keep her composure. She waved a white-haired couple forward with brittle cheer, but her voice trembled. The supervisor lingered beside her, whispering sharp instructions into his radio. Security officers hovered close, uncertain whether they were managing a passenger or a scandal, and Amina Wallace stood apart, still by the window, unmoved. A group of business travellers whispered among themselves. One muttered, "She could sue." Another said, "She doesn't have to." A third, eyes on his phone, replied, "It's already happening." Because online, the clip had crossed 1 million views. The first viral thread on Twitter carried the caption, "She didn't raise her voice once, but she just shut down a $2 billion airline deal." Not first class. Thousands retweeted. Screenshots spilled onto Instagram stories. The hashtag climbed into trending list before the flight even left the gate. Karen noticed passengers murmuring and staring at their phones. Her unease deepened. "Keep moving," she told the line too loudly, as though volume could drown out the shift in atmosphere. But the shift was irreversible. Amina finally turned from the window and walked back toward the podium. The crowd held its breath. Cameras tilted upward. Every eye followed her steps. She stopped just shy of the boarding carpet, not on it, not yielding, but close enough to command attention. She extended her ticket, once more steady as a verdict. 2A, she said. Purchased, confirmed. Karen forced a smile. "Ma'am," I explained. The supervisor cut her off. "Scan it." His voice cracked like a whip. Karen hesitated. "Scan it." He repeated sharper. The scanner chirped again, green, undeniable. The supervisor turned to Amina. "Dr. Wallace, I sincerely apologize." Karen blinked. "Dr. U. Wallace." Her face drained. She whispered, "Who is she?" The supervisor didn't answer. He knew he had been briefed through his radio minutes earlier. The passengers leaned in curiosity, thick in the air. One whispered, "She's someone important." Another asked, "Wait, did he say?" Dr. Amina's gaze never left Karen. "You assumed I didn't belong. You tried to erase my seat with a word. You thought policy would hide your prejudice." Karen swallowed, hard eyes darting to the cameras. And yet Amina continued, her tone cool. "Your company depends on me more than you understand." The supervisor flinched. He understood. Karen tried to recover. I was just following procedure." For me, Amina said, her voice still low but carrying, "This isn't just about a seat. It's about decades of being told to wait to prove to accept less. Those days are finished." The words spread across the terminal like a wave. Phones caught every syllable. On Twitter within minutes, the clip of her saying, "Those days are finished," was looped endlessly, accompanied by captions like, "This is history, this is leadership." She said it for all of us. One reporter posted, "Confirmed woman in viral JFK clip is Dr. Amina Wallace, investor and board member, tied to a 2B aerospace contract airline in crisis developing story." That was the first public crack in the secret. The crowd at the gate didn't know all the details yet, but they could feel it. This wasn't just a passenger. This was someone whose presence carried weight beyond the carpet. Karen's voice shook. I didn't know that." AR said evenly was the problem. The supervisor leaned closer, almost pleading. "Dr. Wallace, please board now. We'll file a report. We'll escalate. Just let's move forward." Amina shook her head. "Forward is not a section, it's a standard, and your airline hasn't met it." The cameras loved it. Passengers murmured. The atmosphere was electric. One man whispered to his neighbour, "She's about to bury him." The neighbour nodded. "She already has." Online, the number spiraled. Not first class was joined by a new one. 2 billion gone. The airline's communications team scrambled phones buzzing with reporters demanding statements. Executives sent urgent messages. What is happening at A14? Who froze the Wallace deal? The answer was standing calmly at the gate, watching her own story burn its way into headlines. Passengers debated openly now. A young woman asked, was she right to stay so quiet instead of lashing out? Her companion replied, that's the power. Calm hits harder than shouting. The opinion poll had begun not just online, but in the concourse itself. Karen finally realized she was cornered. She stepped back from the podium, eyes wide, mouth drawn. Her authority had vanished. Emma remained still, expression composed, posture regal. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to demand. The silence she carried was enough. And somewhere in the city, stock tickers began to tremble. Analysts whispered about the frozen deal. The first institutional investors placed cautious sell orders. Her true identity was still only half revealed, but it was enough to terrify those who knew what $2 billion meant. The concourse didn't yet understand the full scope, but they felt it. This was no longer just about first class. This was about power, who wielded it, and how. The video from Gate A14 was no longer just a clip. It was a contagion. What began as a teenager's post on TikTok had erupted into a storm spreading across every platform. By the time Flight 97 taxied from the gate, the footage of Dr. Amina Wallace being denied her rightful seat had already passed 2 million views on Instagram Reels. On Reddit, a thread titled, "She didn't look like first class now." TB is gone climbed to the front page with comments piling faster than moderators could refresh. On Twitter, hashtags multiplied. Shat, not first class number 2 billion gone. Wallace effect. At first, it was disbelief, then outrage, then fascination. People weren't just watching the insult, they were watching the fallout in real time. Inside the airline's Manhattan Tower, the mood was hysteria disguised as business. The CFO stared at his monitor, the frozen transfer glaring red on the screen. 500 million blocked, he muttered, voice cracked. It was supposed to land at 9 sharp. Treasury says Wallace Capital revoked authorization. This isn't a glitch, this is deliberate. The CEO, usually unflappable, looked 10 years older in 10 minutes. His phone buzzed non-stop. Shareholders, partners, journalists, even his own wife asking what was happening. He slammed it face down on the table. Why, he demanded, why would she do this? The general counsel leaned forward because one of our gate agents treated her like she didn't belong. The room went silent. The communications director pushed his laptop across the polished mahogany table. On the screen, Amina's image froze mid-sentence. Policy is a word. Dignity is a standard. Underneath the caption screamed, Black CEO freezes 2-beer deal. After being told she wasn't first class, the CEO pressed his fingertips against his temples. God help us, the CFO's voice quavered. If the Wallace deal collapses, we lose not only revenue, but collateral agreements. Leasing contracts, joint maintenance, even the regional hub expansion. They're all pegged to this infusion. How bad? A board member asked, dialing in from London. Existential, the CFO whispered. Across the table, the general counsel flipped open a folder. If she sues, we're looking at discrimination damages in the hundreds of millions. And if this turns into a class action, the plaintiffs will line up around the block. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Spin it as a misunderstanding. Too late. It's viral. Draft a statement. No statement survives 2 billion vanishing. The CEO slammed the table. Enough. His voice cracked with fury. We need Dr. Wallace on the line now. The comms director shook his head. She isn't answering, and she doesn't need to. The internet is her spokesperson now. Silence pressed down. Outside those glass walls, the markets were already trembling. Pre-market trading showed the airline stocks sliding. Analysts on morning television speculated live. One said, a freeze this size means she controls leverage the company can't afford to lose. Another countered, this isn't just a finance story, this is reputational collapse. Back in the terminal, the conversation was no calmer. Passengers scrolled through feeds, showing one another the viral thread. A mother said aloud, "She's right. You can't treat people like that." A businessman replied, "It's just procedure." A college student leaned in. "Procedure doesn't cost $2 billion. Bias does." Phones recorded every exchange. Those recordings themselves became new content feeding the beast. Meanwhile, Karen Holt stood at the gate, pale lips pressed tight. She hissed to a colleague, "I followed policy." She didn't look like first class. The words were overheard. A passenger tweeted them within seconds. That tweet crossed 300,000 impressions in under an hour. Screenshots spread like gasoline. The phrase, "she didn't look like first class," became the epitaph of a brand. Inside headquarters, directors shouted over one another. "She's making us bleed. She owns us. Don't you get it? We can't afford for this deal to vanish." The general counsel's voice rose above the din. "We need to consider regulatory exposure. Do EEOC FAA. This could bring investigations." The CEO pounded the table again. "Stop listing problems. Give me solutions." But there were no solutions. At Black Stories Unveiled, we've seen this pattern. Arrogance at the front line. Panic at the top line. A single moment of humiliation cascades into systemic collapse. On Instagram, a Hollywood actress shared the video with the words, "Every black woman knows this story. Respect is not optional." Her post alone drew 600,000 likes. A retired NBA star added, "She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She just pulled $2 billion. That's power." The airline's social media inbox overflowed with fury. "Boycotting your flights. You'll never see another dollar from me. Not first class, not my money." In the boardroom, the CFO turned to the CEO. "The freeze means cash flow gaps. If she doesn't release the funds, we can't service debt coming due next quarter. Credit agencies will downgrade us within days." The CEO's phone buzzed again. A message from the chairman of the board conference. A call in 1 hour. "Explain why the Wallace contract is collapsing." He dropped the phone back on the table. "We need her back, whatever it takes." But Dr. Wallace was not waiting for their call. She stood calm in the terminal, hands folded, eyes forward. Her silence was eloquent enough. Passengers began speculating out loud. "Do you think she'll accept an apology? No. She'll pull the deal. Wouldn't you?" The debate spread online in poll form. Twitter's trending poll read, "What should Dr. Wallace do?" Options: accept apology. Pull two-bowl B deal. Sue. Tens of thousands voted. Nearly 80% chose pull the deal. The communications director in headquarters read the poll aloud. The board members groaned. "This is not just her move anymore," he said quietly. "The public wants blood." The CEO's face hardened. "Then they'll get it from us unless we fix this." The legal chief whispered, "There's no fixing this. There's only paying for it." In the terminal, Amina's phone buzzed again. Another message from her COO. Headlines exploding. Markets down, board and meltdown. She didn't smile. She didn't react. She simply looked out the glass toward the aircraft waiting on the tarmac. It gleamed in the sunlight, oblivious. For her, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about standards. And for the airline, this was no longer about one passenger. It was about survival. At Black Stories Unveiled, we remind you the cost of arrogance isn't measured in vouchers or apologies. It is measured in billions in boardrooms, in collapses that begin with a single sentence. This decision, the CFO whispered in the panic room of headquarters, is going to cost us our survival. And the board still didn't realize the full truth. They hadn't just crossed a passenger. They had crossed the very woman who held their future in her pocket. The boardroom in Manhattan shook with voices, but none of it mattered. Once Dr. Amina Wallace stepped into the light. Until now, she had kept her identity close, letting silence work as her sharpest weapon. But silence had already done its job. The airline had panicked. The markets had noticed, the world had leaned in. It was time to let the truth out. She stood before a cluster of reporters who had gathered at the terminal, tipped off by the tidal wave of online outrage. Cameras flashed microphones angled toward her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her words cut through the noise like a clean blade. "My name is Dr. Amina Wallace. I am not simply a passenger on this flight. I am the principal investor behind Wallace Capital Partners, controlling stakeholder in the $2 billion contract your airline depends upon." Gas rippled through the crowd. A reporter dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Amina's gaze remained steady. "Today, I was told I did not belong in first class. Today, I was told to step aside. Let me be clear. It is not I who will step aside. It is the culture that made such arrogance possible." Her words were broadcast live. CNN cut into programming with a breaking banner. Black CEO investor reveals identity after 2 deal freeze bums. 3 million viewers tuned in within the first hour. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. #G Wallace, power 2 billion gone, #dignity first. The airline stock began to slide like an avalanche within 30 minutes of her statement. The ticker bled red, down 10%. Then 15 analysts on Bloomberg used words like collapse catastrophe, irreversible trust loss in the gate area. Passengers looked at their phones in disbelief. A college student muttered, "She just took down an empire with one sentence," his friend whispered arid back. She didn't take it down. They gave it to her. Karen Holt stood frozen at the podium, colour drained from her face. She had not expected the woman she dismissed to be the very investor her airline depended on. She looked to the supervisor for help, but the supervisor only stared grimly, radio pressed to his ear. Karen Holt, the voice on the other end, said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Step away from the gate. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Phones rose higher. The cameras caught every detail. The shock on Karen's face, the humiliation, the collapse of her authority in the very space she once controlled. Passengers cheered quietly. A mother whispered to her child, "That's what justice looks like." But for Amina, this wasn't about one attendant. It was about an industry, a culture, a pattern too long ignored. She turned back to the microphones. "This is not the first time. It will not be the last, unless accountability is more than a word. I am freezing the deal until structural change is made. Diversity pledges are not enough. Bias audits are not enough. I want guarantees enforceable and binding before $1 moves." The reporters erupted with questions. One shouted, "Dr. Wallace, are you saying the airline's future is in your hands?" Amina's reply was measured. "I am saying their future is in their own choices. I will not finance arrogance. I will not underwrite prejudice." On Instagram, her words became text overlays on the viral video. On TikTok, users remixed her calm declaration with captions like, "She didn't yell. She froze 2 billion." The soundbite, "I will not finance arrogance," turned into an anthem repeated in thousands of posts. Celebrities amplified the message. An A-list actress tweeted, "Every woman who's ever been told not first class feels this. Thank you, Dr. Wallace." Her post drew 600,000 likes. A Grammy-winning singer posted a video. Power isn't shouting. Power is one message that costs billions. Respect. 500,000 likes in hours in corporate headquarters. Chaos had reached fever pitch. The CEO demanded, "What will it take to get her back?" The CFO whispered, "We can't afford her demands." The general counsel muttered, "We can't afford not to." Board members shouted over one another. Sell assets, blame the agent, apologize now. But the truth was undeniable. Dr. Wallace had already won the narrative. The company was reacting to her, not the other way around. At Black Stories Unveiled, we've seen that his pattern. When the truth of power is revealed, the scramble is no longer about denial, but survival. Back at the airport, Amina allowed herself one glance at her phone. Messages poured in from allies, fellow board members, community leaders. One simply said, "Well done. Another history will remember this." Her COO sent a final confirmation deal frozen. Stock down 20%. Pressure mounting. All eyes on you. Passengers continued to film capturing her as she calmly collected her bag. She didn't stride, didn't storm, didn't flinch. She simply walked with the poise of a woman who had just rewritten the rules. Karen Holt was escorted away trembling. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Was that justice?" And Atha shouted back, "Not enough." The debate ignited instantly was firing her fair. Too far, too lenient comment sections filled with moral judgments, each clip spawning arguments. But the moral judgment that mattered most was Dr. Wallace's. And she had delivered it with one gesture, one pause, one refusal to be diminished. In the hours that followed, news anchors across networks dissected the moment. Analysts called it a new standard for corporate accountability. Activists hailed it as a turning point for bias in the skies. Investors panicked, pulling funds, calculating losses. By nightfall, the airline's market cap had shed billions. Competitors issued statements pledging reforms. Regulators hinted at investigations. And through it all, the image of Dr. Amina Wallace at Gate A14 replayed endlessly, silent poise, devastatingly powerful. At Black Stories Unveiled, we say this true power doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with consequence. And for this airline, the consequences were already catastrophic. The shock that began at Gate A14 did not stay there. It had leapt oceans. It had leapt industries. It had leapt into homes where televisions glowed and headlines scrolled across kitchen counters. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. The New York Times ran a full front-page spread. Investor freezes Tubbo B airline deal after bias at JFK. The photo chosen showed Amina Wallace with her boarding pass resting on the podium, her eyes calm and unshaken. The article detailed not just the gate incident, but the financial earthquake that followed the frozen deal, the plunging stock, the panic inside boardrooms. More than 1 million readers consumed the story before morning meetings even began. Across the Atlantic, The Guardian wrote 2 billion reasons airlines must face their bias. Leonde in Paris ran a headline Noir Framal. In Tokyo, a leading business daily described her as the investor who humbled an American giant. The message was global. What happened at JFK was no longer a local embarrassment. It was an international reckoning. Television fed the fire. CNN cut into programming every hour replaying the clip of Amina's measured words. MSNBC brought on a panel a labor organizer, a civil rights lawyer, a former airline COO. Each dissected the video frame by frame. The Today Show devoted an entire segment watched by tens of millions across platforms. One anchor said plainly, "This is no longer just a CA customer service issue. This is a systemic industry failure." Regulators took notice. The Federal Aviation Administration issued a rare public statement promising a review of passenger treatment standards. The Department of Transportation called for hearings with senators quick to add their own voices. One declared on live TV, "When arrogance at a gate can erase $2 billion in value overnight, we are no longer talking about inconvenience. We are talking about economic instability." At Black Stories Unveiled, we have seen moments like this one, insult sparking an inferno of reform. But rarely has the scale been this global, this immediate. Airline competitors scrambled. Delta announced an emergency review of boarding policies. United launched what it called a Passenger Respect Initiative. European carriers pledged independent audits of staff training. Middle Eastern airlines released glossy statements promising dignity clauses in all customer charters. None of them wanted to be the next hashtag. But the impact wasn't limited to corporations and politicians. It lived in people. On Twitter, a new tag emerged. "Ashed my not first-class moment." Within hours, thousands of posts appeared. A woman in Atlanta wrote, "I had a business class ticket. The attendant asked me twice if I was sure." I was. They never asked the man behind me. Another from London. They told me to step aside until they verified my boarding group verified what my skin stories poured in at hotels, banks, restaurants. People describe being doubted, delayed, dismissed. Each story added weight to Amina Stan. The hashtag trended in 20 countries, pulling millions of voices into one chorus. For many, this was no longer her fight alone. It was theirs. In corporate offices, memos circulated urgently. One read an immediate actions bias awareness training, customer dignity protocols, mandatory audits. Another said bluntly, do whatever it takes to avoid a Wallace situation. Executives weren't leading. They were following her shadow. The personal cost of this moment was universal. It wasn't only about a black CEO humiliated at a gate. It was about every traveller ever told directly or indirectly, you don't belong. Back at her own office, Amina sat quietly at a long oak table phone, buzzing endlessly. Messages arrived from strangers, colleagues, even rivals. A senator wrote, "Your courage made us act." A Fortune 500 CEO confessed, "I pray our staff never makes us face what you forced them to face." A young woman she had never met sent only 4 words, "You spoke for me." Amina Red set the phone aside and let the stillness return. She had not sought fame. She had sought fairness. And fairness finally was forcing itself into boardrooms that had long ignored it. On Capitol Hill, hearings were scheduled. Airline lobbyists scrambled to contain the damage. Analysts on Bloomberg debated survival strategies. One warned, if reforms are not immediate, the entire sector faces investor flight. Another countered, this is bigger than investors. This is cultural. Money can't patch culture. And still, the hashtags grew. Not first class, our 2 billion gone. H for us, my not first class moment at JFK. Travellers paused by gate A14 as if it were a landmark. Parents pointed out the spot to their children. That's where a woman changed the rules. Staff whispered in break rooms, afraid their smallest word could be the next clip. The industry was about to change forever. At Black Stories Unveiled, we remind you, when dignity is dismissed, the lesson comes later, louder and costlier. $2 billion is loud. But the real sound is the echo in every passenger's story, in every company's panic, in every lawmaker's urgency. This was no longer just about a gate. It was about rewriting the culture of the skies. And there would be no going back. The airport concourse had become a stage, and the world was the audience. Phones glowed in every hand, recording every breath. The atmosphere at Gate A14 was heavy, not with the normal buzz of boarding, but with the electricity of judgment about to fall. The supervisor's radio crackled again. He straightened, eyes narrowing. He looked at Karen Hall, whose posture was still rigid behind the podium. "Karen," he said, slowly, "corporate has made a decision. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." The words cut sharper than the scanner's beep. Karen blinked. "What do I in front of them?" Now the supervisor repeated. His voice carried the weight of inevitability. "Hand me your badge." Passengers gasped. The ripple became a wave of murmurs. Camera zoomed closer, catching the sweat that suddenly glistened at Karen's temple. Her hands trembled. "I was following procedure." "She didn't look enough." The supervisor snapped. "Badge." Karen's face flushed crimson. Her eyes darted from passenger to passenger, from phone to phone, searching desperately for one sympathetic glance. None came. She unclipped the badge from her blazer and let it fall onto the podium. The sound of plastic on wood echoed like a garvel. 2 security officers stepped forward. Their presence erased any last illusion of control she thought she had. They flanked her without a word. The crowd leaned in, eyes wide, phones high. Someone whispered, "She's done." Another muttered, "That's justice." A third voice lower said, "Not enough." Karen's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She turned her head, saw Amina Wallace standing calm, unflinching, eyes fixed not on her, but beyond her, towards something larger. Karen's own gaze faltered. Security guided her away, her shoulders sagging. Humiliation painting every step. The footage hit TikTok before she reached the terminal exit. The caption was merciless. She said, "Not first class, now she's not employed." 500,000 views in 20 minutes. By the time Karen sat in the back of a company van, the clip had crossed 2 million. But her nightmare was only beginning. By evening, tabloids plastered her face on home pages. Flight attendant fired after Tubby. Fallout. Commentators dug up past passenger complaints, small notes buried in feedback surveys, curtain tone selective enforcement of boarding rules, favoritism. Former co-workers speaking anonymously told journalists she always acted like the gate was her kingdom. Her phone buzzed with calls she couldn't answer. News vans parked outside her apartment. Neighbours whispered in hallways. Her teenage daughter scrolled through hashtags she wished she hadn't seen. Not first class. Had badge dropped. Had justice served. Her husband urged, "Don't go out. We can't face them." The humiliation wasn't just professional. It was personal, domestic, inescapable. The woman who once dictated who belonged on a carpet square now couldn't walk her own street without feeling excluded. And while Karen's world collapsed, North Star Airways bled. In Manhattan, the board of directors gathered again, their voices sharp, their faces grey. Investors joined by video screens flickering with fury. "Your negligence cost us billions," one shouted. "The stock has lost a quarter of its value." Another snapped, "We demand accountability at the top." The CEO, Richard Holloway, tried to steady his voice. "We've dismissed the agent. We're restructuring training. We're addressing culture." But the board wouldn't hear it. "This isn't one agent," the chairman hissed. "This is leadership failure. You presided over arrogance, ignored warnings, and now the world knows." Holloway gripped the table. "Give me time to stabilize." "No," the chairman interrupted. "Resign today, or we vote you out tomorrow." Hours later, the airline announced a press conference. Reporters crowded into the sterile briefing room. Millions tuned into the live stream waiting to watch another head fall. The CEO walked in, shoulders, heavy eyes sunken. He stood behind the podium microphone, crackling. "I am Richard Holloway," he began, voice low. "Effective immediately, I resign as Chief Executive Officer of North Star Airways. The events at JFK revealed failures of culture and leadership. I take responsibility for those failures. I believe this company can recover, but it will do so without me." He stepped away. Cameras flashed. The live stream surged across platforms. Twitter erupted with the hashtag justice at 30K feet. On YouTube, clips of his resignation speech drew millions of views within hours. CNN anchors called it the most public corporate decapitation in modern aviation. But the public was divided. In cafes and offices, debates flared. Firing her was right, forcing him to resign too necessary. Necessary or a witch hunt? She humiliated a paying customer. He presided over the culture. Both deserved it. Online polls multiplied. One asked, "Was this justice or too far?" Tens of thousands voted. 72% said justice. 28% said excessive. Comment sections swelled with moral arguments. At Black Stories Unveiled, we have seen justice arrive. Messy, contested, debated. It is rarely clean. But when dignity is denied, consequences cannot be tidy. Investigations uncovered, more complaints. Passengers of colour delayed, downgraded, doubted, lawsuits lined up. Attorneys circling like hawks. Regulators announced formal probes. Stock analysts whispered about bankruptcy protection if the crisis deepened. Karen, meanwhile, sat alone in her apartment, her blinds drawn, her phone silent, her daughter's sobs audible through the walls. She stared at her reflection and saw not an enforcer of policy, but a woman broken by her own arrogance. The punishment had been swift, brutal, public. Yet still the world debated. Was it enough, some asked? Was it too much, others counted. In churches, barbershops, classrooms, people argued. Some cheered. Finally, at accountability, others frowned. This will ruin a family for one mistake. Still others, he has said, it wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. The world finally saw it. Justice had been served, but it had left a bitter aftertaste. For Amina Wallace, the storm swirled without her lifting a finger. She scrolled briefly through headlines. Attendant fired, CEO resigns to be deal frozen. She placed the phone face down and returned to her work. This was never about her ego. It was about principle. Principle, once revealed, had its own power. The villain had fallen. The empire had cracked. The story had become legend. And yet, the question lingered, whispered across comment threads and dinner tables alike. Was this justice? Or had justice only just begun? The noise of resignations and firings eventually subsided. The airline CEO was gone. The attendant dismissed managers reassigned, but Amina Wallace knew punishment was only one half of justice. The other half was prevention, and prevention meant change that outlived headlines. She gathered with her team in a quiet conference room overlooking the city skyline. The sun dipped behind towers of glass, painting the horizon in molten orange. Her COO laid reports on the table. The deal is still frozen, he said. Competitors are circling. Regulators are circling. Everyone is asking what it will take for you to release the funds. Amina folded her hands, her gaze steady. They think this is about money. It isn't. It's about dignity. If they want this partnership revived, it will be under new terms. She outlined them one by one. A passenger dignity clause written into every major contract. Independent bias audits conducted annually. Results made public mandatory reporting of incidents not buried in corporate inboxes, but disclosed transparently. Staff training tied directly to performance metrics. And perhaps most daring of all oversight boards that included passenger representatives with teeth sharp enough to suspend executives who ignored complaints. Her COO blinked. These demands, they go beyond one airline. They change the industry. Exactly. Amina replied, they want my money. Then they meet my standard. Word of her conditions leaked within days. The Wall Street Journal ran a headline, Wallace demands dignity clauses in airline contracts. Forbes framed it differently from boardrooms to boarding gauges. How one investor is rewriting aviation. Some executives scoffed privately, but publicly they scrambled to keep pace. Competitors rushed to announce similar clauses, terrified of being branded the next target. Stockholders demanded reforms, afraid that ignoring her conditions would cost billions more. At Black Stories Unveiled, we honor women who transform insult into legacy. Dr. Wallace had turned aborting denial into a blueprint for systemic change. In communities across the country, the ripple was felt in conversations deeper than market reports. In churches, pastors spoke of her as a reminder that dignity was sacred, not optional. In classrooms, teachers told students, she turned silence into action. In boardrooms, executives whispered, what if she invests in us next? The hashtag #JoshPassengerDignity trended, filled with calls for reforms beyond airlines, hotels, banks, retailers. Customers demanded contracts that respected them not as revenue streams, but as human beings. For Black women especially, her stand was more than corporate leverage. It was validation. In Atlanta, a grandmother posted, I was told to step aside in 1975 at a ticket counter. Today, I watched her refuse. I feel seen. In Chicago, a young lawyer wrote, when she froze $2 billion, she freed me. I know my worth. Generations linked through one act. Meanwhile, within North Star Airways, the interim leadership faced a brutal choice. Either accept Amina's conditions and regain her capital or collapse under the weight of lost trust. After weeks of wrangling, the board relented. They signed the first ever passenger dignity agreement, binding and law enforceable in court. The signing itself became news. Cameras flashed as executives in their names beneath the clause. But the image that mattered was Amina standing tall, not gloating, not vengeful, but resolute. Reporters pressed forward. Dr. Wallace, is this enough? She answered simply, it's a beginning. Those words became a banner on Twitter. They spread with the caption, Justice isn't revenge. Justice is a beginning. Millions shared it. Still, critics argued. Some said she had overstepped, that one, investors should not dictate to an entire industry. Others countered, if it took one woman to force dignity, then maybe that's exactly what was needed. The debate only fueled the story's momentum. Passengers began to feel the change. Signs appeared in airports, passenger dignity policy enforced. Gate agents attended new training sessions. Complaints were logged and followed up within hours, not buried for months. For the first time, customers sensed accountability. At Black Stories Unveiled, we have seen this arc before humiliation turned into law, exclusion turned into reform. But never had the pivot been this swift, this global. For Amina, the grace was in restraint. She could have bankrupted the airline entirely. She could have pulled her funds, permanently left them to rot. Instead, she offered a path forward, but only one paved with dignity. Her advisors asked, "Why not finish them?" She replied, "Because finishing them changes nothing. Reforming them changes everything." Her words echoed across industries. Banks began exploring dignity clauses in lending. Hotels drafted transparency pledges. Even tech firms whispered about equity audits. The long-term change was no longer hypothetical. It was underway. And yet one question remained. Would she stop here satisfied with reform? Or would she make one final move that no one saw coming? Passengers at JFK still visited Gate A14, pointing, remembering. Parents told children, "This is where she changed the rules." Communities gathered inspired. Across generations, Black women spoke to one another in reverent tones. She did what we always knew was possible. The setup was clear. Justice had become reform. Reform had become legacy in motion. And still whisper spread, wait until you see her final move. Because Amina Wallace was not finished. The storm had reshaped everything. Karen Holt was gone. Richard Halloway, the airline CEO, had resigned live before millions. Shareholders licked their wounds, regulators circled, and competitors rushed to pledge reforms. For weeks, the headlines had been relentless, each one tying the airline's collapse to one woman's calm refusal at Gate 14. But Dr. Amina Wallace knew punishment was not enough. History never remembered only what was torn down. It remembered what was built afterward. She decided to build the announcement. The press conference was held in a glass-walled atrium. Cameras packed shoulder-to-shoulder lights hot against polished stone floors. Reporters expected updates on the frozen $2 billion deal. Investors expected terms, deadlines, dollar figures. Critics expected more corporate blood. What they got was something no one had imagined. Amina stepped to the podium in a midnight blue suit, her posture unyielding yet graceful. She looked directly into the cameras and spoke. "I stood still at a gate. At A. The world moved. The airline fell. Leaders resigned. Policy shifted. But consequences alone do not guarantee change. Change requires vision, and vision requires grace." Murmur spread. Grace. What did she mean? She continued, her voice measured, deliberate. "Today, I am launching the Wallace Scholarship Fund, seeded with my own capital and contributions from partners. This fund will provide full education support for children of aviation employees displaced in this crisis, including, yes, the daughter of the attendant who denied my seat." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked furiously. "Are you saying you'll pay for her child's future?" one journalist asked incredulously. "Yes," Amina replied without hesitation, "because arrogance is not inherited and shame should not be passed down. A child should not carry the burden of a parent's failure." Her words detonated across the airwaves. CNN broke live coverage. The BBC called it radical mercy. The Washington Post praised it as grace beyond precedent. The Wall Street Journal worried aloud. Does mercy soften accountability? Karen's world across town? Karen Holt watched the broadcast from her living room, blinds drawn, her phone buzzing non-stop. Her daughter sat beside her, clutching her knees, eyes wide. When Amina's words landed, including the daughter of the attendant who denied my seat, Karen covered her mouth. Her daughter whispered, "Mum, she's talking about me." Tears blurred Karen's vision. She had braced for scorn for more public shaming. Instead, the woman she had humiliated was offering her child a future. For Karen, it was unbearable and miraculous at once. Shame scorched her pride, strangled her. Accepting this mercy felt like bowing to the very woman she had diminished. Yet denying it meant stealing opportunity from her child. The letter she had written weeks earlier, pleading not for herself but for her daughter, had been answered. She had not expected an answer this generous. Community reactions. The announcement split the public like a fault line. On Twitter, hashtags warred and shot to Radical Grace versus #ATJ Justice Only. One trending post read, "She humbled a corporation. Now she lifts a child. That's power." Another countered, "This is weakness disguised as mercy. She should have ended them." Talk shows pounced. One host mocked, "She just schooled the airline and then paid tuition for her enemy's kid. That's a twist. Shakespeare couldn't write." Another grew serious. "That's not weakness. That's rewriting power itself." Editorials clashed. The Guardian hailed it as a new philosophy of corporate justice. Forbes cautioned investors may question if Grace undermines leverage. Communities divided too. In churches, pastors praised her. "Forgiveness is the final proof of strength," one preached. In barbershops, men shook their heads. "I'd never pay for the family of the woman who humiliated me." In community halls, women debated fiercely. Is mercy letting oppressors off the hook? Or is mercy the deepest cut of all, the scholarship in action applications poured in? Children of dismissed employees, not just Karens, sought help. Pilots, sons mechanics, daughters, even families of mid-level managers displaced in the chaos. Within months, dozens of scholarships were awarded. The viral image came unexpectedly. Karen's daughter shied clutching a certificate embossed with the Wallace Capital crest. That single photo travelled faster than any press release. For some, it was hope incarnate. For others, it was betrayal. Comment threads burned. "Look at that child's smile. This is redemption. She humiliated our sister and still got rewarded to him." Amina's perspective. Through it all, Amina remained calm. When asked why she extended grace, she answered quietly, "Because power that only destroys leaves ashes. Power that builds leaves memory." Privately, she confided to her team, "I remember my mother's face when we were told to step aside at a counter. I remember wishing someone would prove the world wrong. Today, I proved it, but tomorrow belongs to the children. Always the children." Wider ripples. Her final act triggered ripples far beyond airlines. Banks announced scholarship initiatives for families harmed by layoffs. Tech companies pledged diversity-linked grants. Politicians cited her fund as proof that accountability could be paired with humanity. And still, the debate raged. The New York Times op-ed page ran dueling columns. One titled, "Grace's Justice Elevated the Other. Mercy Masks Power." Podcast devoted episodes to passing her choice. One commentator raged. She let Karen off the hook. Another sighed. She didn't let her off. She carried the punishment further by forcing Karen to live knowing her daughter's future came from the woman she tried to erase. Generational divide. Elders praised her restraint. "We've lived too long in a world without mercy," one elder said. Younger voices bristled. "We wanted fire. We wanted them ruined." Both sides agreed on one thing. No one could stop talking about her. The legacy. Months later, the Wallace Fund surpassed $100 million in pledges. Hundreds of children enrolled it in schools and universities under its umbrella. A new standard spread contracts with passenger dignity clauses, bias audits, and now education for families caught in corporate failures. Gate A14 became a quiet landmark. Travellers paused to point whispering. That's where she changed at everything. And Karen. She lived in uneasy silence, grateful for her daughter's chance. Humiliated by the source, she told no reporters her feelings. But her daughter said in one rare interview, "I will study hard because her grace gave me this chance." The debate that endured even years later. The question lingers, was Amina's final act the highest form of justice or a softness that dulled the blade at Black Stories Unveiled? We believe the truth lies not in comfort, but in tension. Power that leaves us arguing is power that endures. Amina Wallace did not leave statues. She left questions. She left reforms. She left children walking into schools that once seemed out of reach. And she left us debating, was her grace the ultimate justice or the sharpest betrayal of